There is a pie that has sat at the center of Amish tables for as long as anyone can remember, and most people outside our world have never heard of it, and the ones who have heard of it usually make it wrong. It is called Shoofly pie. And yes, the name really does come from flies, from shooing the flies away, and I will tell you that whole story in a moment because it is a good one. But first, I want you to understand what this pie is because it is unlike any pie you have ever made. There is no fruit in it, no apples, no cherries, no berries. There is barely anything in it at all that you would think of as pie filling. It is made of molasses and flour and sugar and a few other humble things that every plain family had in the pantry, even in the leanest, hardest times. And out of those poor, plain, cheap ingredients comes one of the most beloved pies in all of Pennsylvania, a pie so good and so tied to who we are that you cannot understand Amish cooking at all until you understand Shoofly pie. So let me show you how my grandmother made it every Sunday for more years than I was alive to count. Let me start with that name because everybody asks Shoofly pie. Now, there are a few stories about where the name comes from, and I will tell you the one my grandmother told me, which is the one I believe. This pie is sweet, deeply, richly sweet, because it is built on molasses. And in the old days, when this pie would be set out to cool on the windowsill or the porch rail, the flies would come to it, drawn to that sweet molasses smell. They would come in the summer heat, and the woman would have to stand there shooing them away. Shoo, fly, shoo. And so the pie got its name from the endless business of shooing the flies off that sweet molasses top while it cooled. There is another story that says it was named after a molasses brand, and maybe that is true too, but I like the flies. I like that this pie is named after a small, ordinary moment in a plain woman's day, standing at her window, waving her hand over a cooling pie. That is very much what this pie is about. The small, ordinary moments, the plain, everyday sweetness of a hardworking life. Now, let me tell you why this pie exists at all, because there is a reason, and it is the reason behind so much of our cooking. This is a pantry pie, a pie you can make in the dead of winter when there is no fresh fruit to be had anywhere, when the garden is under snow and the fruit cellar is running low. Every single thing in a Shoofly pie is a thing that keeps. Molasses keeps forever in the jug. Flour keeps in the bin. Sugar keeps. Baking soda keeps. These are the shelf-stable bones of a plain pantry, the things you always had no matter the season, no matter how lean the year. And some clever, thrifty woman generations ago figured out that you could take these few keeping things and turn them into a pie, sweet enough for Sunday, sweet enough for company, sweet enough to make a hard week feel a little softer. That is genius, plain and simple. That is making something out of almost nothing, which is the whole heart of how our people have always cooked and always lived. And I want to say a word about the molasses itself because it is worth understanding why it sits at the center of so much of our old baking. In the days when this pie was born, white sugar was dear, it was costly, and it came from far away, and a thrifty, plain family did not use it freely. But molasses was cheap. Molasses was the sweetener of working people, of poor people, of anyone who had to count their pennies, which was very nearly everyone. It was thick and dark and strong, and a little went a long way, and it kept in the jug through any season. So the old cooks learned to build their sweetness on molasses instead of sugar, and a whole world of dark, rich molasses baking grew up out of that thrift. Shoofly pie, molasses cookies, gingerbread, ham glazed with molasses, beans baked slow with molasses. It flavored the whole plain table, this humble dark syrup, and it still does in our homes today. When you taste a Shoofly pie, you are tasting the sweetness of people who could not afford much sweetness and who made the most of what they had and turned their thrift into something wonderful. There is a kind of beauty in that I never get tired of. So let me show you how it is made. And the first thing you need to understand is that a Shoofly pie has two parts. There is a wet bottom, a gooey molasses layer that sits down in the crust, and there is a crumb top, a soft, sweet, crumbly layer sprinkled over it. The magic of the pie is in the way those two come together in the baking. The wet molasses and the dry crumbs, some of the crumbs sinking down into the molasses and some staying up on top so that you get a gooey bottom and a cakey, crumbly top all in one slice. Now, I will tell you, there are two kinds of Shoofly pie, and plain families argue about which is the true one. In the gentle way, we argue about such things. There is the wet bottom Shoofly, which is gooier, with a good layer of molasses that stays liquid and sticky at the bottom. And there is the dry bottom Shoofly, which is more like a cake all the way through, with the molasses more mixed in. My grandmother made the wet bottom. To her, that gooey molasses layer was the whole point. And a dry bottom Shoofly was a fine thing, but it was really more of a crumb cake pretending to be a pie. I am with her. I make the wet bottom. But I will show you both, and you can decide for yourself which family you belong to. You start with your crust, a simple pie crust, the kind you would make for any pie, rolled out and laid into your pie plate. I am not going to teach the whole crust today. That is a lesson all its own, and I will give it to you properly another time. But a plain butter or lard crust is what you want, nothing fancy. Line your pie plate with it, crimp the edges, and set it aside while you make your two parts. Now for the crumbs. Because you make the crumbs first, and here is a little secret, you are going to use some of those crumbs in the bottom too. So make a good amount. Into a bowl goes your flour, a good bit of it, and your sugar. Brown sugar is lovely here. The white will do. And a pinch of salt. And then you cut in your fat, butter or lard or shortening. Cut into the flour and sugar with a fork or two knives or your fingertips. Cut it in until the whole thing looks like coarse crumbs, like wet sand, like the crumb top on a coffee cake. That is your crumb mixture. Some cooks add a little cinnamon or a whisper of nutmeg to their crumbs, and it is very good that way, warm and spiced, though a purist Shoofly is just flour, sugar, fat, and salt. Set your crumbs aside. Now the molasses layer, the wet bottom, the soul of the pie. And here is where the real flavor lives. So listen close. You need good molasses. Not the light kind, not the fancy kind. You want a good, dark baking molasses. The kind with real depth and a little bitterness to it, because that bitterness balances all the sugar and keeps the pie from being sickly sweet. My grandmother used the darkest molasses she could get, the kind so thick it barely pours in the cold. Into a bowl goes your molasses, and then, and this is important, you dissolve baking soda in hot water and you stir that in. The hot water and the soda do something wonderful to the molasses. The soda reacts with the acid in the molasses and makes the whole thing foam up light and airy, and it mellows that dark, strong flavor into something rounder and softer. You will see it foam and lighten right before your eyes when you stir the soda water in. Some recipes add an egg here too for richness and to help it set. And my grandmother did one egg beaten into the molasses mixture. So molasses, hot water with the soda, dissolved in it and an egg all stirred together into a dark, foamy, fragrant liquid. And now you build the pie. Here is the wet bottom method, my grandmother's way. You pour about a third of your crumb mixture right into the bottom of your unbaked crust, spreading it over the bottom. Then you pour your molasses mixture over those crumbs, gently filling the crust up to about 2/3. And then you take the rest of your crumbs, that good big pile of them, and you sprinkle them evenly over the top, covering the whole surface of the pie with a thick, soft blanket of crumbs. What happens in the oven is the beautiful part. The molasses is liquid, and those bottom crumbs soak into it and thicken it into that gooey, wet layer. And the top crumbs mostly stay up on top, baking into a soft, crumbly crust. And in the middle, some of them meet and marry the molasses into something between cake and pudding. 3 layers out of 2 mixtures. It is a little miracle every time, and I have never once grown tired of cutting into a Shoofly pie to see how those layers came out. You bake it in a moderate oven, not too hot, until the top is set and firm to a gentle touch and the molasses is bubbling up a little around the edges. It takes a while, this pie, a good long bake, because that molasses layer needs time to set. You do not want it raw and soupy in the middle, but you do want it to stay gooey. So there is a bit of judgment to it. When the top springs back gently when you touch it, and the edges are bubbling, and your whole kitchen smells of dark molasses and warm sugar, it is done. And then, this is the hard part, you let it cool all the way. A Shoofly pie is not really itself until it has cooled completely, and that molasses bottom has set into its proper gooey texture. Warm from the oven, it is a soupy mess. Cooled and settled, it is perfection. So bake it in the morning or the day before and let it sit and shoo the flies off it if you have any and wait. Now let me tell you how we ate this pie, because it is not what you might think. Shoofly pie is a breakfast pie. Yes, breakfast. For all its sweetness, in a plain home, this was often eaten in the morning with coffee, dunked right into the hot coffee, if you please, the way my grandfather ate it every single morning of his life. He would cut a wedge of Shoofly pie and set it beside his coffee, and he would break off pieces and dip them in and eat it slow. And that was his breakfast. And he lived to be 91, so I will not hear a word against it. It was a working man's breakfast, sweet and filling, molasses giving quick energy for a long morning in the fields. Of course, it was eaten as dessert too, after Sunday dinner, with a cup of coffee, and it was set out for company and taken to gatherings. When a neighbor came calling of an afternoon, the first thing my grandmother did was put the coffee on and cut into whatever pie was on the counter. And more often than not, it was Shoofly, and the two of them would sit at the kitchen table with their coffee and their pie and talk through the whole afternoon. That is how visits happened in our world. No fuss, no fine things, just a pot of coffee and a homemade pie and the time to sit and be together. A Shoofly pie was always ready for that, always waiting, because there was always one on the counter. But that morning slice, dunked in coffee, that is the truest way an Amish family ate their Shoofly pie. And if you have never dipped a bite of molasses pie into hot black coffee, I am telling you, you have a treat waiting for you. This pie is tied up in my memory with Sunday, because that is when my grandmother always made it. Saturday, she would bake, filling the kitchen with pies for the Sabbath and the week ahead. And there was always a Shoofly among them. And Sunday morning, before we walked or drove to the service, there would be coffee and a slice of Shoofly to start the holy day. It is the smell of Sunday to me, that dark molasses smell. It is the smell of my grandmother's kitchen. with the good light coming in and everyone in their plain Sunday best and the whole slow, peaceful rhythm of the Lord's Day laid out ahead of us. Food does that. It ties itself to the days and the people and the feelings so that 50 years later, a single smell can carry you all the way back. I cannot make a Shoofly pie without being a girl again in that Sunday kitchen. And I would not want to. That is a gift that this humble pie of molasses and flour can carry all of that inside it. Let me give you a few things to watch for. First, use dark molasses, real baking molasses, not the light mild kind and never blackstrap, which is too bitter. You want that good dark depth. Second, do not skip the baking soda and hot water step because that is what mellows and lightens the molasses. And without it, the pie can be too strong and too dense. Third, do not overbake it, or the wet bottom will dry out and you will lose the whole point of a wet bottom Shoofly. Pull it when the top is just set. And fourth, let it cool completely before you cut it. I know it is hard. The whole kitchen smells like heaven and you want it now. Wait anyway. It is worth it. A properly cooled Shoofly pie with its gooey bottom and its crumbly top, sliced clean and set beside a cup of hot coffee, is one of the great simple pleasures this world has to offer. And it costs almost nothing, and it comes straight down to you from 200 years of plain women baking in plain kitchens, making sweetness out of almost nothing at all. So this week, make a Shoofly pie. You will not need to go to the store for much because that is the beauty of it. Most of it is likely in your pantry right now. Molasses, flour, sugar, butter, an egg, a little baking soda, that is a pie. Make it on a Saturday, let it cool overnight, and have a slice with your coffee on Sunday morning. And dunk it if you are brave. And think of all the plain families who have started their Sabbath exactly this way for longer than this country has been a country. You will be joining something old and good, and you will understand in a way you cannot until you taste it why we love this strange, sweet pie of ours so dearly, and why no Amish table has ever been quite complete without one. If you would like every recipe I know, all the pies and breads, and the old dishes my grandmother taught me, they are gathered together in my kitchen field book, waiting for you just below this video. 100 recipes from Lancaster County, going all the way back to 1720, written down the way I would tell them to you if you were sitting right here at my table with a cup of coffee and a slice of Shoofly. And if you are new to my kitchen, come and sit with me a while. I share these old ways every few days, the food that kept plain families fed and warm and together for 200 years and more. Subscribe, and we will make them together. There is always room at my table for one more. Until next time, God bless your hands, God bless your kitchen, and God bless every soul who gathers at your table. Now go and make your Shoofly pie.